the fantasy and you want to refer to me by my character's name, all the more power to you. I just don't find it necessary to take offense, if that makes sense.
Well, thank you very much for that. And glad that we're in a low offense zone. And I like fantasy myself. So,
yeah. So, and it also, if I'm not dressed up as Nomi, but some people really have only come to know me as Nomi, will refer to me as Nomi or she when I'm just hanging out as Jared. And it's totally cool. I love it both ways because, well,
oh, thank
let's
you.
be honest, the attention's landing on the same person.
Right.
But you can call me this, that, or the other. I'm really not bothered by any of it.
Okay.
So
Well,
whatever
thank you.
you feel more comfortable.
I'll keep that in mind.
Well, sir, different rules apply to
you. All right. Well, hey, babe. With that, hello.
Hello.
So today we have another special guest.
Yes.
And in this house, it's always Halloween. We are perpetually watching horror films. It is always a sad day when we take the decorations down on December 1st from Halloween.
I had to text someone this morning that I broke into the leftover, in quotes, Halloween candy. Because last night we found a 50-piece bag at the market and replenished our Halloween bucket.
We had to get it. It was on sale. We didn't want it to feel bad.
Right. It's going to go to waste. It's in a loving home.
Well, yes, my belly is very loving.
In honor of how much we love Halloween, today we have a guest. His name is S.A. Bradley, and he is the host of Hellbent for Horror, a 4-time Rondo Award-nominated podcast exploring all things of horror, including books, film, comics, music. This is cool, babe. As described by Guillermo Del Toro, who I love. I can't get enough of Cabinet of Curiosities right now.
Really good.
This podcast is well researched, articulate, and entirely absorbing, which is amazing. I love that. Bradley, who's loved being scared by over 1,600 different horror films, turned his passion into purpose by sharing his expansive knowledge on countless podcasts and anthologies. He's also lectured at Webster University and College of Idaho and performs his live show, My Horror Manifesto, in NYC, across other horror conventions across the US. And he's an author. He wrote the book Screaming for Pleasure, How Horror Makes You Happy and Healthy, which I read and I love, and it's so much fun. I'm fairly new to horror, I would say in the last 15 years, thanks to Nomi. But reading this book...
always corrupting.
I was surprised by how much I didn't know about horror and some of my favorite films. So it's a really great read if you get a chance for Screaming for Pleasure. And also nominated for a Rondo Award for Best Book of 2018. I would like to welcome S.A. Bradley to the podcast. Hi.
Welcome.
Hi. Thank you so much, Nomi and Robert, for having me here. That was quite an introduction. I feel so much better about myself right now. It wasn't bad at all. I'm so glad to hear that you've gotten into horror, and I understand. One of the things that people always say is you get frustrated with people who don't watch horror movies or are just starting out. I'm like, no, they get to experience all these movies for a first time. I can never have that again. That excitement that you get when you see that first shock that really gets you. And since it's relatively new to you, as you know from my book, I love to talk about first kisses with horror, which is essentially me saying, what was the movie or the book that jazzed you in such a way that it brought you down this terrible fate? So I must know. It's only 15 years old at best. So what's your first kiss?
Oh, gosh.
I just have to say, Robert didn't really get a first kiss. Robert went straight to rimming with horror.
it was pretty...
It took him to a really, really wild movie.
Yeah, I would say my
Society?
My first... Oh my gosh.
Oh no, we just watched Society though. I love Billy Warlock.
That would be such a difficult first kiss in horror.
Oh yeah.
But what a way to go. Actually, my first voluntary first kiss with horror was with the movie Scream in 1998, I believe. It was at a Halloween party with my friends and they were all watching it. So I felt like I had to watch it as well, which is funny because that's how I ended up enjoying horror with Nomi, who on one of our first dates decided that I needed to go see the brand new reboot of Halloween.
Rob Zombie's Halloween.
Oh wow.
And
Right?
yeah,
I mean,
so
I honestly didn't even know.
so welcome, Robert. What was yours, Nomi?
My very first scary movie was Creepshow.
Oh
Oh,
yeah,
what a great one. Yeah.
so good.
So good. But I was also it came out in 82, so it hit VHS in 83, so I was 6 when I saw it. And I loved it though. And Father's Day is my all-time favorite. I love
There's
what's her
my
name?
cake,
Carrie
Bedelia.
Nell's character. Aunt Sylvia.
Yeah.
She's such a broad
It's so
in the
funny.
best sense of the word. But the first movie that, the first like scary movie that I sat down and watched by myself in entirety, I was around 10 or 11, and it was Halloween, the original Halloween. On Halloween night.
Still your favorite.
Mm-hmm. And my mom came home, and I thought I was going to get in trouble for watching an R-rated movie on TV, but she was into something that night because she just said, okay, and then went upstairs. And I was like, now as an adult, I totally know what that was. But as a kid, I was like, I can't believe I get to watch a scary movie. So it's pretty cool.
That's a great first one. I mean, it was huge for me as well, that movie. I like to say that that's a standalone. I know there was Halloween 2 and Halloween 3 and all those, but the first movie is about the shape. The others are about
Yeah.
Michael Myers. And there's a
Yeah.
whole different story, the idea of the creation of myth. Everything about that movie just works so well. But I've
Well,
like the horror slut I am, I've seen every one of them, including the new trilogy, and I just endure it.
do
Yeah.
you think
Endure is a good word.
that it's scarier if there isn't the Michael Myers connection? Because to me, I think this poor girl being haunted or stalked by this deranged serial killer who at this point in time is kind of human, simply because she was the first person he saw when she walked up to the door to drop off a key. Like, no connection. It's so random, and that's life. And that's why horror movies, I think, are so great, is because they're really just a metaphor for life.
Oh, sure. And I think you're correct on all of that. I always say that monsters are metaphors. They allow us to have a distance, a safe distance between us and the danger that is in our lives. And the world is really disturbing, but a horror movie can never really hurt you. In fact, what it does is it takes the thrill, the scare that you have, and turns it into a thrill. And I believe that that's why the original
Good
Halloween
point.
works so well, is the idea that we are always horror works best in the unknown. What we really want to do is be surprised, because what scares you can be very subjective compared to what scares me. What scares Robert may not scare me. What scares me may put Robert into a coma. So we can't just say it's about being scared, right? It has to be
Yes.
something different. And I think what we do is we want to feel a level of control over the unknown and a level of control over the surprises that happen to us in life. I tell people I would never want to watch a movie about the insurrection, but I would not mind seeing zombies do the same thing to the Capitol. And it's just that idea that we have a little bit of distance.
Interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's one
Yeah.
of those deals where it really helps. And I think that Carpenter did that on purpose. He has a white blank face. He stands still. He's wearing garage coveralls, which have not even a name or anything on it. He is a blank slate. It's the old Kuleshov effect in editing, which is where you
Mhm.
take 3 different pictures. They're just stills, and the guy can have an emotionless, expressionless face. And the way that you edit them gives you a different story depending upon what the audience brings. So we bring all of our fear to the shape. I don't even, in the first film, it's the shape. And I think that it's certainly scarier. It's what made Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer almost unbearable to watch the first time I saw it, because there was no rhyme or reason. There was no way to stay safe from this guy. If you just happened to be there and it was the wrong time, you're going to die. And so, and the idea of the supernatural part of that, like for me, nothing scarier than demon movies or ghost stories for the first 2
Yeah, me
acts.
too.
Nothing scary for the first two acts. The
Yes.
third act, though, it's where if it's once they find out that someone's possessed, they're like, well, we'll just call up the priest. It's like a doctor's
Right.
visit. You get a
Time to go. You
shot.
can't stay here.
Yeah, that's right. A couple Hail Marys, and it's going to be okay. So the movie, which could be about anything, shrinks to the size of a chair or a bed. And the same thing with
Hmm.
ghost stories. I call ghost stories the small claims court of the supernatural, because it's always this thing of a third party has to be haunted because the other party, the offending party, is not listening to the ghost. So it's like, once you find out that it's a ghost, the thing that's scary is being stalked, right? The scary
Right.
thing is being attacked and no one believes you. And I was brought up in
Mhm.
a Christian fundamentalist cult that said demons are right here, right here. So it was like
Mhm.
watching a horror film was where I was no longer an outsider, a complete outcast. And I was an outsider with them. I was an outsider with other people. Horror movies gave me a safe haven to where the monsters and the people who were involved were having high gothic drama of the things that were happening between my ears at every given day. So, it's helpful stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for me that's why I feel like there's such a strong connection with the queer community and horror.
Yes.
It's that sense of that outcast, and that no one can hear you, no one can understand you, no one believes you that you're experiencing these horrors. And there's that relatability to it that is, um, I don't want to say comfortable, because I'm definitely not comfortable when I watch horror films. But there's a semblance of realism in there that I think it makes it a more interesting viewing experience.
Yeah, I feel that we feel seen. Now, that's how I looked
Hmm.
at it. It was kind of like,
Yeah.
we talk about representation matters, and it does. And it can be multiple layers of representation at any time in a horror film. When I was a kid, my first kiss was Don't Look Now, an artsy horror film from the early 70s, something that you would not expect me to say it would be my first kiss. But it was Donald Sutherland, Julie Christie, and a drowning daughter that they're not taking care of in the very first part of that film. And I went into shock. I was 8 years old when I saw this thing by accident. And the nightmares that I had were incredible. But it wasn't about, oh, the kid drowns. It was about mom and dad aren't going to save you. They can't save you. You're not
Hmm.
protected. And that's how I felt about my life. I knew that I had many secrets in my closet that if my parents found out, I was doomed. And I was awkward around that stuff. Frankenstein, the Frankenstein monster, was huge for me. Talk about an outcast, someone whose dad just
Yeah.
says, nope, you're out the door. And no matter what he does, if he finds something beautiful, he fucks it up. He can't do anything. He's clumsy.
Mhm.
The way he looks and the way he acts, people immediately fear him. They come after him with torches. I mean, luckily that never happened. Not yet. It's still early.
Right. As far as we know.
Yeah.
um,
It's interesting because I think a big portion of horror movies, which is a big portion of the reality we live in, because everybody's coming from different perceptions, is gaslighting and
Yes.
talking
Yes.
about being that victim that no one believes. And
Hmm.
that's why it is so relatable, because I think on any level, it's a big buzzword now, but before people knew the word, we understood the action of being told something that was different than what we perceived, a sort of taming of the shrew, like tis day,
Yeah.
but clearly tis night kind of thing, right? And that's what horror movies exposed for me. And I think that's where I found my solace. Okay, I'm not the only one that this happens to.
Yes. And I think that's something of the helplessness of a
Mm-hmm.
mad world. I think it was Wes Craven who said, we're surrounded by mad fate with blood in its eyes. And that's like an amazing thing for me to think of when I was a child, how much I felt in danger, how much I felt in danger most of my life anyway. But
mhm.
there was something about being in this cult where I was being told an entirely different reality, and everybody
Mm-hmm.
around me had that reality, and then finding out that it was pure hokum. Mom,
Yeah.
dad, God lied, and then it's like, wow, I had no idea I was gaslit, but I basically, up until 10 years old, everything that I had heard was not the reality, and they're still involved in it because it's so much easier to believe in
Mhm.
the lie than it is to tell the truth that everything that you believed was wrong. That's one of the things that I think is great about horror, is that it constantly keeps you in an anxiety of what if you're wrong. What if it is
Yeah.
just the guy next door is just a creep as opposed to a demon?
Yeah.
There's
And
sort of
you
an
continue,
induced humility.
yeah. Like Fright Night is so great at that. Fright
Oh
Night has
yeah.
this whole thing where you have the vampire Jerry, who's just he relishes in the fact that he can torment this kid once he realizes
Jerry
that this kid
Dandridge.
knows.
He
Yep,
does.
Jerry Dandridge.
He loves it.
Yeah, it's such a
And
great
Chris
villain
Sarandon is
because
so great in that role.
yeah, he's
At that
fantastic.
time, I don't think now he would be considered the heartthrob that he was in 1985.
Right.
But back then, I mean, that was, well, like the remake in 2013, Colin Farrell. Like that was the Colin Farrell of 1985.
Mhm.
It was sexy and
Oh
seductive.
yeah. Sexy, seductive. He had that fantastic long coat, which I was like going, what a
Yeah.
great, no need for a cape. You just have that
Mm.
long coat
So
that's
cool.
can embrace everybody. I thought it was just fantastic. And I love that in that, that's such a wonderfully sadistic thing that we know happens in real life, which is we think we finally got something on someone who has power. And they just look at you and go, I'm gonna
Yep.
admit to what you're talking. No, I'm just gonna crush you. I know all the
Yeah.
ways to
Yeah.
mess with you. And
Yep.
that idea of being caught in that, knowing the truth and not being able to, invasion of the body snatchers, such a great metaphor because every
Mm.
decade it's in, it talks about whatever the anxiety was of that time. And at times,
Mhm.
it was there for both sides. So in the 50s, when they had the first invasion of the body snatchers, it was equally considered an anti communism film and an anti McCarthyism film, which are in direct
Mhm.
Right.
opposition of each other because they kept the subtext so open and wide. And it was really about the fear of anesthetization of everybody around you, that you're the only person who cares anymore. And boy, I'll tell you, I've been feeling that for the last 6, 7 years. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It's so interesting to me that an art form like film can do something so dynamic like that through storytelling, because something like horror, I believe, is so easily brushed aside. It's like,
Mhm. It
it's
is.
horror, it's fine. Yeah, okay, good. Enjoy your scary movie. But there are a lot of really wonderful films that um, make you think, make you
Yeah.
feel. Like you said, it's sexy, it's scary, it's funny, it's thoughtful,
Provocative.
it's provocative. Yeah.
Mhm.
And something I
It,
wanted to know is Nomi's obsession with horror films and how they make Nomi feel better.
oh yeah.
It's almost
Well, I
like
want to
a
hear about this.
comfort.
It's
It's a
it's
comfort to
I
her. We're like, we'll go to bed at night, and she's like, "Okay, time for Texas Chainsaw Massacre," and puts that on the TV screen. And I'm thinking, "No, I can't sleep through this. What are you talking about?"
I I grok that so much. I remember seeing a movie, Paranormal Activity, when it first came out, and it
Yeah.
really scared me because they didn't have credits in the theater when it first came out. It just ended in black,
Hmm.
and you sat in black until the lights came up, where they had a long leader on it just to make you uncomfortable, and people are like screaming, "Turn on the lights!" So I get out of that, and I'm really super unsettled because this was kind of what my childhood believed, right? The idea that
Hmm.
this thing would be just, it lives to torment you. It gets all of its juice from your tears. It drinks the tears of children, whatever it is. You have that kind of thing happening, and I was scared. It really
Yeah.
unsettled me. So I went home and I watched Drag Me to Hell and put me in a better mood.
Oh, so good. So good.
I love that. That's like
Drag Me to Hell is
the
amazing.
dichotomy between the two of them is so funny.
Well, it's here. Here's the deal: is there's a movie. I don't want to use The Exorcist for as an example because that is something entirely different. But Grave Encounters scared the
Yes.
shit out of me. Okay, but Blair Witch Project, when the lights came up, first thing out of my mouth is, "I want my money back." That was the biggest hunk of shit I ever sat through. I spent the entire movie waiting for something to happen that I considered scary. And then once something finally started to happen, it was over. But then there are people that had their minds completely annihilated by that movie. And I'm like, but when are you ever going to be in the Carolina woods?
I don't know. Maybe someday.
Yeah.
No, well, a cautionary tale, and you wouldn't go. Like, that to me was a completely avoidable encounter.
Yeah, I
right?
understand.
Because the lore of the movie was it only happens in the woods. So the lesson is don't go in the woods.
It's Jaws.
It's but it's also a
Yeah.
commentary. It's another commentary, right?
Yes,
Another
absolutely.
Yes, Jaws, but let's say if there was an attack in Long Island, then you would go swimming in.
Don't go to Long Island.
Yeah, you find another beach to go.
That's another. It's usually the right thing to say anyway. Don't go to Long Island. There are many other places to go. But yeah, I hear you. Yet, and that's what I love about horror is that you don't have to love it all. The umbrella of horror is so wide. I call it the Nile right now because what we have is like tributaries of all these different rivers of areas and styles of horror. Back in the 80s, when I was a child, there was really only room for one type. Everything was filtered into being slashers for 6, 7 years, and then a change into something else. But there was only one trend, and now we have so many different ones because of the pandemic opened people's eyes to foreign films because they did not have American films to watch. But we also have just streaming in and of itself, and DVDs are still used by some. But you find that there are so many different places for you to get the type of horror which speaks to you. So you don't have to say that you love or hate horror on whether or not you like The Exorcist, or if you like Blair Witch, or if you like Grave Encounters. These movies all fall under that umbrella, and I think that it's a very broad definition that I use because it is so subjective. So I just say that horror, the dictionary definition is an intense feeling of fear, dread, disgust, or terror. So a horror movie gives you those. But I also say you have to ask why. Why, out of all the things, all the different storytelling styles that there are, why did the author decide that they needed to use those things? They want you to go home with something. So whatever movie attaches itself to you is usually one that you go home with a certain feel. Blair Witch got me rather well because it was what it was exhilaratingly experimental, but I didn't really think that it was real. There were a lot of people who felt gypped because they fell into the marketing thing that was online. It was the first big online marketing deal. But the thing is, we're always getting those, like people sitting there saying, "Oh, I felt ripped off." In other words, they were saying it was just a marketing play. I said, "You do know that we heard all about Tom Cruise and his wife in the last of the oh my goodness, how can I forget his name? Kubrick, Eyes Wide Shut. Nicole Kidman, Tom Cruise. They're gonna make out. They're gonna be naked. That's tell me that we weren't thinking that we weren't told to think that. We were told how many times that Robert De Niro gained 50 pounds for Raging Bull. By the way, he gained 50 pounds. Does that have anything to do with the storyline? No, but it's great publicity. It's the kind of thing that draws you in. We are always getting drawn in. And so what I think Blair Witch did, which I think I personally think Paranormal Activity did it better, is it's an experimental film. You have the actors are actually using the cameras. I love that. Hello, baby. I hear the cries. Why are we talking about scary movies? But yeah. But we do the work of that an experimental film has. They're expressionistic films. I think the best horror films have that. They don't horror before it was said that it's easily dismissed. It is, and it's a shame because I think what we're really dismissing is how uncomfortable we feel in ourselves, because horror is the only genre that's named after an emotion specifically. It deals with the Jungian shadow self. We have to have this moment where we know and realize that we all have this dark part, and it's okay. You just don't want to overindulge it, but you also can't ignore it. If you ignore it, then you get on TMZ for doing something absolutely insane because it's a brat that cannot be ignored, right? But the thing that I think it's we do that but horror is amazingly diverse. I call it the most beautiful of all the genres. It is tailor made for metaphor and allegory and myth. And you can talk about anything that you want. I call it the Frank's Red Hot sauce as well. You can put it on any other genre and it just makes it better. It can be in science fiction, it can be in
Totally.
comedy, and just builds it.
Yeah.
And I think it works like music. So many times we talk about art in this high minded way, but even the best art we feel first. We go back and
Hmm.
intellectualize it later. We think about why it affected us. But horror is just this thing where it doesn't need horror doesn't
It's
need
visceral.
intellect. Yeah, it's very
Hmm.
visceral. It's like music, right? One note
Yeah.
from a song that you love can change your mood. One shot from a movie that you absolutely adore, a horror film, can change your mood for the moment. It just has this power. And film is just astonishing because it's every art form that there is, all working together. You can't have it
Yeah.
without costuming. You can't have it without painting. You can't have it without light and theater. All of these things matter. Writing, photography. It brings all of those together to create this illusion that we're seeing the real world through a filter. And I think horror is just tailor made for that as well. There's a reason that some of the first films were horror films, right? They just attract,
Hmm.
they also allow you into a dream state that most dramas aren't going to allow you in. You can lose yourself in any film, but I think horror films allow you to lose yourself in a place where you would, angels fear to tread, right? I don't want to be in a real horror movie.
I
Yes.
love that, Scott.
Speaking of angels fearing to tread, I feel that horror is also the most realistic of all genres because if you break down what you're seeing versus the metaphor that it's meant to be, it is delivered in the most realistic, visceral human experience way. Whereas a romantic comedy is filled with so much fluff and bullshit, right? The piss and
Right.
vinegar is really what fuels this world. And that's what horror gives you. And you had mentioned that it's good to be in touch with those places, but not to go too far. And of course, my personality, once I
Hmm?
find something that I like,
What's that? What is that?
yeah, it's like, let's just do it until it's either not available or until it hurts me.
Eat all the Halloween candy.
Exactly.
Right.
Do all the
I
things.
I do the
So
same thing.
in my
Music, same song for a month.
Yeah.
yeah, and in my ability to use certain horror movies to seek comfort, I was always pushing, like, okay, well, now I'm not scared because I was building up a tolerance, like I was doing for a lot of
Yeah.
things. So when I was 11, I decided on summer break, I was at my dad's and I was going to go rent The Exorcist because I had
Oh,
seen a little like snippet of it on a like a horror documentary show.
And you thought, good time, family fun.
I was like, this is gonna be the movie, right? So my friends and I rent it and we watch it and we get to the crucifix masturbation scene and I
hmm.
completely lost my shit. I was out of my mind, crying hysterically. One of my friends was trying to protect me from the screen. The other one was rewinding it, and then their dad walks in, and for like 3 days I was shaken. I was shook. I made my brother sit on the toilet while I took a shower because I could not be alone because I thought I would be possessed.
Yeah.
And then it took me another 10 years, maybe even 13 years before I saw it again
Mm.
in its entirety, and it was the director's cut
Oh,
Uh-huh.
in
Isn't
2001.
isn't it amazing the power that that has and the reclamation? I look at so much. I look at like horror and certain music, especially outsider music, where it's loud and crazy, kink. All of these things are reclaiming parts of us that were maybe at times taken without consent. And I
hmm,
Mm-hmm.
think that there are times when we're dealing with a certain amount of our own anxieties or brought, who knows what exactly the emotion is. The emotion just might be, "Bleh." There's no name for it, but horror can touch that. And there's
Right.
so much power in going back to a horror movie that really, really disturbed you and saying, I'm going to sit with you. I'm going to sit with you, demon. We're going to work this the fuck out. And there's
And
something
it did.
truly amazing. Yeah, it's
It
astonishing
sat
how
with me.
good you can feel.
Well, it took me a long time to understand why, and I don't think I really did until just this moment. And realizing that that particular scene exposed a trauma that I had been hiding since my childhood. And it was the violation, the forced self violation
Mm.
that really from this disembodied voice, right? And this force that you couldn't see or identify with, and that goes into the gaslighting. I know I did this bad thing to you, but I'm the adult and I'm telling you that I didn't do this bad thing to you. But yet here I am with all this blood and gore and damage and trauma. And I think that's why that movie scares me. But Blair Witch doesn't affect me at all because I'm not a camper. And whatever metaphor that movie is speaking to is not the kind of trauma that I've experienced, so it hasn't triggered me in any way. And then ipso facto has failed in its mission to enliven me or quicken me.
Yeah, that's a magnificent observation. I think it's very true that why we respond to certain things over others is, I think, it's personal. It can be really
Mm-hmm.
personal what horror will bring up for us, which is why I think some people go out of their way to not be frightened. I hate when people say things to me. Of course, me being horror guy, I hear all sorts of things. If people will come across an entire convention hall to tell me how they cannot stand horror movies, I'm like, good for you. But
Look,
you'll
he's
have
over
that.
there.
That's someone who
Yeah,
can't stand the reality of life.
yeah. Or they'll say something like, I just have too much of an imagination. Like I'm over here going, lout. I sit here and I drag my, I do not, what is this thing in front of me? Oh, yeah. It's such a cop out, right? It's so silly. Of course, it has nothing to do with imagination. It does have something to do with your fear. You have a fear,
Mm-hmm.
and it's okay. We all have fear, but please don't put your fear on me. It's
Yeah.
completely understandable that you may not want to watch these, but I can guarantee you there is a ghost story or a horror movie of some sort that is
Yep.
tailor made for you that you will love. And you probably love a horror movie. You just don't call it a horror movie because you think every horror movie has to have teenagers getting axe murdered. And that's not the
Right.
truth.
Right.
That's just
But
a
meanwhile,
small
they're picking
piece.
out 3 movies from the sci-fi aisle, right?
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
worse, true crime. So everybody's a true crime fan now, trashing on
Right.
horror. So I usually sit
Murder
there and I go,
porn.
yeah, you want to talk about something that's unfair and a lie, mysteries. I say, I love horror because at least it's honest. At some point, you are going to have empathy. You're going to have empathy for someone on that screen. But mysteries, they start with a dead body and then they spend the rest of the movie or the play denigrating every human being so that you realize that everybody's toxic and horrible. The
Right.
That's a
MacGuffin,
good point.
a human life is lost as a
Yeah.
MacGuffin just to talk
Yeah.
shit about everybody else, that everybody is guilty of some sort of transgression. So it's like, give me a break. That's intellectual, though. This
Right.
stuff
Well, that's
down
another
here, what I,
metaphor too, though, isn't
yeah.
it? People's worst behavior comes out when someone, like, let's say a family member dies, they got some money in the
Yes.
will. Like, you will see people at their worst around
Oh,
death.
Yeah.
especially if there's a house
There's
involved.
yeah, for sure.
Jesus, what is this like antiquated blue chip notion of what home ownership means today? It's so bizarre.
Right.
But yet, I won't touch the stock market.
Um,
Right.
Please,
there was
please. You better
there
release that clutch out a little bit.
there was something else that I found in my experience with horror over the last, we'll say, 15 years. That's about when I've started. Um, and like I'm drawn to the more comedic or colorful or kind of moody films rather than the slasher films. I appreciate them both
Sure.
for different reasons. But something that you talk about in your book is about the beauty of the horrible and how these films are beautiful in a way. And I want to read a quick little excerpt from your book that I thought was really striking. See if you can identify what this is coming from, babe.
Okay.
Brett is looking for Jonesy, the ship's cat. We see something he doesn't. We see the fully grown xenomorph creature curled up on dangling chains behind Brett. The phallic exoskeleton head uncurls from its body in one smooth organic twist. It is wet, and fluid drips out of its mouth. We can almost smell the humidity of the body. Brett senses something, and he turns to see the alien beast tower above him. Brett doesn't run or scream. He can only stare. Like,
Is that Alien?
yeah, I've got chills. Just like
Yeah.
that. Like I can picture it in my mind, and I know exactly what he's feeling, and I know exactly that damn cat.
Yeah.
Like,
Darn
like
cat.
know exactly what that cat's doing.
I,
Um,
I
but
think
there's a
that's the
beauty in
highest.
that fear.
Yeah. Yeah, I think first off, there's very few monsters that have ever been created that are so organically sexual and beautiful and disturbing and terrifying. It's like everything that you fear about sexuality on two legs. You know, it's got
Yeah.
all of this stuff that is like
Right.
this really dark, dark deal. But it's
That
also
would be Nomi.
the 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 thing that I think is the most beautiful thing is where you have a disturbing image that somehow is so visceral and precise and it affects you so deeply you can't look away. And that's the sense of
Mhm.
awe. They talk about that in religions often, awe. And I think it's the highest form of art that you can do, where it's almost terror. You are emotionless in a way. You can't do anything. You're not screaming, you're not running, you're just there observing. It is as if a god mouth has appeared in front of you, whatever it might be that you would use as that metaphor. It's just astonishing to me, and I think horror movies often hit that this moment where we uh, we don't compute anymore. There's a moment where we just become observers. You know, we
Mhm.
no longer have a stake in the game. We've the game is over in its own way, and I've seen that with you know, if you see something that's a disaster, car accident or something like that that happens in front of you, and you, of course, everybody talks about it slowing down, but I remember the pieces of glass tinkling by. It's just such
Mhm.
a ballet of all sorts of reality and logic going away. It's almost, you know, it's all logical in front of you, and yet it does not compute what your expectations were as you were crossing the street. You were not expecting that car accident. You're not expecting the weird screams. You're not expecting screams coming from behind you because someone else is viscerally feeling this and cannot stay quiet. You know, there's this
Mhm.
whole disarming thing that can happen. I think that the nature of horror is to catch us in that fashion, give us a moment where we are observant in a way that is not intellectual whatsoever. We are helpless. We allow ourselves to be vulnerable. I think that's another reason why people fear horror a lot. Vulnerability is uncomfortable for a lot of people. To me, it's sexy as
Yeah.
hell, but vulnerability is hard for people to let into their lives or let anybody else see. And when we go to a movie theater and we're going to be around a bunch of strangers letting this emotion flow, that
Mhm.
vulnerability can be astonishing. And it's also, I think, why we laugh together and we scream together. And those are like church revivals when you go to a movie where that happens.
Mhm.
It's also why you get those really masculine guys that are there on a date that right when something good's about to happen, they make some sort of like fart noise or something because
Yeah,
they just can't. Like, you know who the real pussies in the theater are
that's
at
right.
that moment, right?
Yeah, that's right. Don't
It's
go
it's
there.
interesting because right, no, please do.
Yeah,
Vulnerability, I think, is a huge misconception in our society, and allowing oneself to be vulnerable, I think, means that we've lost control somehow, right? Because we interpret
right.
that fear. If we were in control, we wouldn't fear that. But I think that it's for me vulnerability. It's like when a bird sits on a branch on a tree, it doesn't trust that it will fall because it puts all of its trust in the branch it's sitting on to not
Yeah,
break. It just says, well, if this branch breaks, I'll open my wings up and I will find another branch. That's vulnerability, and vulnerability is sexy because it means someone is aware, to
yes.
me. And awareness and mindfulness is sexy. And I don't think you can have that without vulnerability. And without vulnerability, you're really telling the world that you don't trust yourself, that you've got to put your trust in everything around you instead.
Yeah,
And that's
it's
why some
very,
people get miffed with horror movies.
yeah, very good, Naomi. I agree completely. I think it's interesting that people have the response that they do to horror because it does hit on something that's so personal. A lot of times, you used to hear this a lot, where they would say that horror movies are reactionary, and because it's talking about the other. But my thing is, it's reflecting how much we're othering people. because you can sit
Hmm.
there. What I like to say is, does everybody remember when we had ugly laws in this country? Before the end of World War I, we had laws where if you were maimed, if you were blind, if you had some terrible condition, you were not allowed, epilepsy, you weren't allowed outdoors because and during the day because it might offend the children and the mothers.
Oh, the
And so
children.
yeah, the poor children, they can't see a
Who's going to
person
think
without
about the
legs.
children?
Yeah, right. What's he doing in there? But the
Well, you know
whole
what those children are going to grow up to be, right? So just let them be.
yeah, exactly. The thing is, during that time, the number one silent film star was Lon Chaney, Man of a Thousand Faces, who
Hmm.
played deformed men didn't have arms and legs. Now, is it his fault? No, he's commenting. Horror is commenting on our ugly side all the time. I think the Purge movies for the last decade have told the story of America. Whether it's a
Mhm.
good story or not,
Yeah.
we may not be able to process that for another decade.
Right.
That's something Toby Hooper said. He goes, sometimes when you make a movie, you don't know what it's really about for 20 years. And that's because it's dealing in the unconscious. When you're an artist, you are creating in the stew. You're not outside of the stew. So of course, there's going to be this seepage that's going to happen of what the anxieties are. And to me, horror and exploitation movies, if you really want to know what was scaring people and driving people crazy and giving people anxiety in any decade, go to see the exploitation films, the low budget horror movies, because those are the ones that live or die on whether they can make you plop down that money to come see the outrage of the day. So they're going to tell you what the world is actually afraid of. There were in the silent era, there was a whole white slavery thing. There was no white slavery, but boy, those movies were popular for about 10 years. During the time when everybody was afraid of what was happening in the cities. The cities are becoming the thrones of America, and they're surrounded by all sorts of colors of people, and people of all sorts of different beliefs. And of course, if you go there in your purloined Protestant way, you're going to get taken and put somewhere on a ship and used and abused. So these things are always horror is not the reactionary one. Horror is the one that's commenting on what's out there. It's telling you
Mhm.
who you are, whether you like it or not. And we sometimes accept it, and sometimes we don't. And I think that
Yeah.
there's a lot of
Oh my
interesting stuff to
god.
learn.
Epiphany. Another reason why I can't stand The Exorcist was because as a child, I was forced to do things that were I didn't want to do. It was like my hand was not my own hand, and
Mm,
that it's like home invasion, but on an entirely different level. It is like a
yes,
soul invasion.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's why I think Rosemary's Baby is so potent, and how
Oh
it's
yeah.
even
Mm,
more
so
potent
good.
now because it's all
Hmm.
about autonomy, having body
Yeah.
agency. She has none.
Yeah.
And you
Yep.
can't have a better metaphor than the elderly women who are helping her have a child, but they don't give a shit about Rosemary. It's all
Right.
about the
Yeah.
child that's not alive yet. It has more rights than she does. And the whole
Mhm.
idea
That's
that she's in a
unreal.
womb, yeah, the apartment
Yeah.
that she's in is like a womb. She can't leave it. And I think it's just all those kind of horror films talk to anybody who was abused as a child well, not everybody wants to be talked to in that way, but to me it is always talking about how we were not in control, right?
Hmm.
Somebody was able to take advantage. There's always this what we consider evil, something dark, something horrible. uh, no one's going to believe us. I mean, I was in a belief system that said that the world was going to end in 1975. Like, that's it. If I don't convert my friends, they're going to die. They're walking corpses.
Mhm.
I'm given that
Mhm.
responsibility at 8. And so, that's abuse in its own self
Yeah.
without all the other
Yeah.
stuff that came along with it. And, the idea of no wonder I like horror. The idea of God's hand is terrifying. And there's some great movies like Frailty and Get Shelter, Take
Mhm.
Shelter that deal with this so well that when I saw Frailty in the movie theater, I'm outside holding my chest afterwards, like, what the fuck did I just see? And I look across, and everybody else is just walking, and then there's this one guy on the other side holding his chest. We ran to each other. And we needed to know each other's story. What was it about this movie? What was it that hooked us so hard? And it
Yeah.
was telling our stories of, I remember being so horrified by what the truth of my household was, that I was in a daze at my desk as a kid, like falling asleep whether I'm tired or not, because I can't register, I can't compute everything that's happening in my life. It's way too much for me. And when you're a kid, you have no agency. You can't get away.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
so, yeah, it's uh, this is my time. We inherit, we return all of that stuff that was taken. I reclaim it all. And everything that
yeah.
I do, everything I stand for these days.
I love
Really
that.
well said.
Yeah, that reclamation idea is just it's key, and that's something that's going to stick with me next time I'm watching and realizing why I'm enjoying these films so much.
Mhm. Well, I think in life, our number one priority is survival.
Mm.
And the awareness that horror movies can bring to certain individuals, I believe, is too clear of a mirror for them, right? And so there are people that have their hands out because they know that horror movies represent the horrors of our daily lives, whether we are aware of it or not. Like you said, when you're creating in the stew, it can be a subconscious thing at that moment in time. And then 10, 20 years later, we're like, oh, duh. And like with The Shining, some people think it's so boring. It's their Blair Witch. I
Yeah.
love The Shining because I get into the psychology and I know the book and I know the movie. And so they kind of live simultaneously in my mind, even when I watch the movie. And it's just, it doesn't scare you if you don't have that kind of fear. But I think, you're looking at Jack Torrance, who's midlife, not a success, dealing with a vice that he knows he's losing control over, doesn't like his family, doesn't like his life in a situation, and he's pissed and he's losing his mind because he realizes it's too late for anything else now. So what are you going to do? You just sort of give in to those bad feelings. And some people, I think that that's too close to home. And I respect that, but I don't know. I do sort of, I do have that bucket of water standing next to the person with the pitchfork and the torch. It's like, just everybody calm down.
Right. Yeah. Oh, it's funny that you say that because The Babadook is one of those movies as well, where
Mm,
it really strikes home for women in particular, but it strikes home for a
Yeah,
lot of people who feel that they're grieving. The idea of The Babadook is it's the unkind thought. It's the evil thought you're not supposed to have, and it doesn't matter. It's going to come out one way or the other. And you have to learn to
hmm
live with that, and you have to get over the grief. But you'll hear often from especially men go, yeah, I kind of like the Babadook, but man, too much of that kid. And I said, well, that's the point. The point is that she can never get away from that, right?
yeah,
This is what she's stuck with. And the idea that someone would actually bring up a mother resenting their child over something like you took my love. I know
yeah,
logic tells me you didn't do it, but you did, and all of
yeah,
this stuff. Having that, and she's not the bad guy. She's not the total villain is a brave thing. Most of the time, the woman can hate kids, but she has to be a witch and she has to have a big cauldron or some kind of thing like that. And here we had someone who we're supposed to empathize with as well and
hmm
see what nightmare it would be to have
mm,
all of that struggle in your life. And so for some people that movie resonates deeply and it's one of their favorite
mhm.
films. And for other people, like going, man, that needed some scissors, needed an editing
Right.
job, get around that kid. I get it. I
And
get it. No,
that's
you don't.
and that's fair too. I mean, it's if someone doesn't get it, or if someone puts their shield up because they're like, "Uh oh, danger zone. I don't like my kid." I can't deal with those feelings that this movie brings out. I think that um, intrusive thoughts. I don't know if everybody has them, but I believe a huge portion of us have them. And I know that with women and postpartum depression, it's really a struggle. And Brooke Shields, when she came out about her postpartum depression, said she would have thoughts of throwing her baby across the room and just imagining it hitting the wall and sliding down with the gore. And it's like, oh my God. And it's like, we need to say that it is okay. It's our brain's way of processing something that scares us, but yet I think you may have said, Scott, earlier, there was something about like a forced perception of normalcy that we have, right? in this country. And so when you think an intrusive thought, you think something bad about yourself because you're like, well, if I'm such a great person, I wouldn't have thoughts like that, because normal people don't have thoughts like that. And that's really dangerous. And I think horror movies call to bluff, if you will, the bullshit we feed ourselves to feel like we fit this normal mold that deep down we all know doesn't exist.
Oh, absolutely. This is outsider art, the
Mm-hmm.
further you are on the outside, the more chips you have from the different organizations that are outside, the more I
Yeah.
think you really relate. And I have friends who are Black who will tell you that until there was representation, they were living someone else's life. They were doing the W.E.B.
Yes.
Du Bois thing. And so you
Mm-hmm.
have that kind of bit where uh, once you get seen as something that I felt when I was a kid, that representation is so important, and the outsider feeling is so deep, and we realize that there are more of us than there are what's considered normal, and that normal is this
Mm-hmm.
strange, arbitrary idea of an agreement that came about long before I was around to put up a vote, and
Right.
that's falling apart. There is genre fluidity as much as there is gender fluidity. And I think that you're
Yeah.
seeing
Yeah.
these old ideas, these labels are falling apart everywhere. And I think horror is allowing, we're allowing different styles of story. We're allowing different perspectives. We're allowing people to look like people. I know there are many folks who are having issues with that. Go fuck yourself. You'll be dead soon. Don't worry. It's not going to be too painful. But it's time for everyone to
Yeah.
feel as if they're being represented, and and it helps. It helps when I realize that you don't die. You don't have to die when you tell the truth about yourself. When I
Yeah.
started getting together with people who are horror fans, it was only me and my weirdness, all my weirdness and awkwardness. And then I started to find out there were more people that had more than one chip in their pocket, in the oddity and awkwardness. And we get together. Now I have horror conventions that I go to, and there's not a weekend that if I didn't want to, I wouldn't be able to find my brethren and go out and
Right.
have whatever kind of connection that I want to. But it allowed me to be a lot of different things that I would not allow myself to be. Horror allowed me to, you know, proclaim my inability to be in part of any joiner religion, my queerness. All of that stuff comes out in time when you're comfortable enough, when you feel protected enough,
Mm-hmm.
when you feel not so alone in that outsider world. And I think that's why Frankenstein Monster mattered so much to me, because I could
Mm-hmm.
really feel Frankie. I could really feel that,
Yeah.
and that whole idea of I'm not alone. Instead of just making me sad, instead of depressing me, these stories instead say someone else came up with this idea too, which means they're thinking the same
Mm-hmm.
thing that I'm thinking. This thought that I'm not allowed to have is not a bad thought. They're just a thought. We
Yeah. And I
go
think
on with our lives.
um, to that, I think it's important to also notice that, or mention that, when we're talking about a minority group, whether it's a person of color or a gay person, everyone that's not in that normal box that you were just talking about, Scott, has learned to be rewarded for minimizing oneself. And the
Yes.
horror movies sort of exploit that, and they debunk that, and they say, hey, there's no reward in minimizing yourself. This is what happens. You die. And that's another
Yeah.
reason I think why people have a hard time with horror movies, because they're like, oh shit, they're getting too close to the truth now.
Yes.
Yeah. I feel like we need to have you back,
That would
because
be great.
even like reading through your book, I feel like we could have an amazing discussion on every single chapter that you touch. It's
Well,
seriously
thank you.
so good and so well put together.
I'm so
But
happy to
as
have learned folk telling me how they feel about movies, and being able to go a
I
little
like
deep.
being called learned. As we're wrapping up, we like to finish up with some rapid fire questions. So I do have a trio of questions for you.
Oh boy. Okay,
First
here
would
we go.
be, Top of your mind, what is your least favorite horror film?
A Confessions of a Serial Killer came out in the early 90s. It was just a cash in on Silence of the Lambs. We had an entire
Hmm.
decade of nothing but those kind of films, but this one
Right.
was just Henry Lee Lucas's story told as a confessional to a police officer, just so he could watch the degradation of human beings. And there
Mhm.
was one sequence particular where he's sodomizing this person and cutting their throats so that the blood would jet. And I said, I'm done. This is where
Yeah.
I meet my bottom. I don't need this.
Yeah.
And it's for someone. I don't say it doesn't need to exist, but to me, that is the one film that to me has that antiseptic quality that I think of when people say it's pornographic. In other words, devoid of emotion,
Hmm.
nothing but an experience.
Yep.
Yeah. Who is your favorite horror villain? This could be like a slasher villain or just someone
Disney villain.
Disney
that.
villain, yeah. My
Lady
favorite
Tremaine, I think,
villain.
is an all-time villain.
Yeah.
Yes. Uh, I think I would have, at one point it was The Shape, and I still think The Shape is something that I think is very high, but I really think one of the most amazing things is Fred Krueger. Once again, kind of like there's only the first Halloween, I think there's only the first Nightmare as well that has
Hmm.
Fred Krueger before it becomes vamped, which is fine. You can vamp
Yeah.
away, but there's
Yeah.
this thing that is truly scary and villainous about this thing that is the sins of the father coming down on the son and daughter, that is
Mhm.
merciless, that gets you while you sleep. That's about as great of a metaphor as the pod people in Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And
For
just
sure.
the way he is in that, his ugliness for sure, but his ugliness in how he held himself. Robert Englund deserved the credit that he got with that, because it was
Yeah.
just, he's not on the screen that often, but he is really disturbing when you see him, and he's
Absolutely.
And
hard.
that movie in particular, I think gave villains license too, because here you have a movie saying it's okay for this child molester and killer to seek revenge for the parents getting revenge for their children. Like,
Yes,
what world do we live in where that is okay? And I think that that kind of margin for metaphor is what we keep talking
Pretty
about with,
twisted.
yes,
yeah,
Yeah.
movie, art imitating life, and some people really needing to reconcile that.
Yep.
yeah.
Scott, what is your favorite horror movie snack? What do you have to have while you're watching a horror scary movie?
Oh, um, boy, I really, really love. It's so fucking sick. But almond joys. It's like the worst candy bar ever. But I have the big snack packs because we just had Halloween and everything. We have a few
Yep.
bags left, and I will root through. We make sure that there's at least one bag that has almond joys in it, and there's just something
Uh-huh.
crazy, queasy weird about that. But yeah, any
Mm-hmm.
candy whatsoever. If I go to a movie
Yeah.
theater, it's Reese's Pieces. There's something
Mm.
really enjoyable about, and a quiet moment just turning that cardboard box and having, I did that during A Quiet Place. Oh, that movie was driving me crazy. So I was just like turning the Reese's Pieces, zap, zap, zap.
Oh, that's so good. Scott, thank you so much for joining us
Thank
today.
you
It
so
really was such a
much.
pleasure and a lot
This
of
was a great
fun.
pleasure. Thank you so much. It was so much fun.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Uh,
And we'll have to have you back.
yeah, for sure. Uh,
Happy.
Gang, please be sure to check out Scott's book. It's called Screaming for Pleasure. You can see it under S.A. Bradley. And you can find out more about Scott on social media at hellbentforhorror.com, or you can find him on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, also at Hellbent for Horror. Thank you so much. And have a spooky day.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thanks for listening. Thanks again for joining us, Scott. And I think, yeah, go get yourself scared now.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.